Hello and welcome. This is Grant Hughes of Grant Hughes Investigates on YouTube. This channel evaluates all aspects of true crime. As you are aware, videos and live streams in this genre often discuss elements of crime that may be disturbing to some viewers. If necessary, take the precautions needed to avoid these feelings. Factual information related to cases is the key to fostering rational true crime discussions. Fortunately, you will find that here. Please hit the like button only once, share the video, and subscribe if you like my content. Thank you very much for watching. Yo, what's going on? Hello, the Broken Scout, Sandy Shirley, Daphne, Dana, 1972, Mama 457 Rose, Cindy J, Phyllis, Luz, Alba, whatever the hell, I can't say that name, Wise Child, Cheryl, Allie Cake, Lisa Valenzuela, K-Me, Phyllis, No, I just didn't want to say your name. The boys. Let's see. Okay, well, here we go. I mean, this is just going to be a night of going over these articles like we used to do a long time ago. I wonder what he's looking at. I mean, doesn't he look good right there? He almost looks like a show dog at the, right there. He's perfect. He looks like he's really attentive, like he's looking into the kitchen right now, waiting for hopefully something. You know, something, some clue that he might get a bite of something. Am I going to get a bite? Oh, here it comes. Do I get something? Is there something? Oh, maybe not this time. Maybe not this time. It sure would be nice, though. I'll just rest again. Almost had something there. Hey, thanks, Dana, 1972. And no, the boys, I didn't intentionally do that, but you hadn't said anything yet for me to say your name. Okay, so you seems like you're just whining again. Yep, Blue's doing just fine. He's doing just fine. He looks like he's... You know, he doesn't cough very much. He coughs a little bit sometimes, but that's about it. Alright, so there aren't going to be any recaps or anything like that. If you come in late, you're just, you know, you have to rewind and get caught up, alright? No, I didn't. So I'm going to put you on timeout. That's not true. I've looked up there. You said it after I said hello to everybody. And that's what makes you a whiner, though. It's like, you know, it just... I'm sure there's other people that were in the chat that aren't worried about somebody saying hello, you know. Yeah, he just keeps going. That's what that person does. They're like almost like a covert troll or something. It's unbelievable. All right, let me just get started here. Well, wow, thanks, the Broken Scout. But man, you've been, way more than your share lately. I appreciate it, but thank you. All right, so this is back in 1982 in Craig, Alaska, where there's 8 people apparently that have been murdered, and it's never been solved. And somebody sent me this a while ago, and I had a folder built up, and just gonna kind of go through all the different articles, and just like we've done along all the time, like what we did in I mean, millions of cases. That's what we've done. Did he say millions? No, not really a million. That's thank you, Cheryl. 279, huh? That's kind of a random number. Does that buy like a Chewy toy exactly, or? Okay, so here we go. Hey, Dusty Lane. All right. 4 unidentified bodies. This is September 8th, 1982. It actually happened on September 6th. But the first article that I could find was right here. 4 unidentified bodies were taken from a burning fishing boat near Craig on Tuesday, an Alaska State Trooper spokeswoman in Ketchikan said today. And here's the actual boat burning right here. And see, it's the name of the boat is Investor. That's why they call it Investor Murders. Thank you, wise child. So, the fishing boat Investor out of Bellingham, Washington was reported burning, at 4:30 p.m. Tuesday to Alaska State Troopers in Ketchikan. The boat was located about a mile northwest of Craig. And like here's Craig right here. And they were saying it's in a cove, so I mean this is like a mile and a half. I'm just guessing kind of in this area. Somewhere in here probably is where it was though. Hey, thanks for being a Megazoid. So many months there, Marie. And thank you, Mama 457 Rose. Ah, jeez, Danny. Oh, God. Good Lord, man. Jesus. You guys... yeah, I'm just gonna... Alright, let's see, let me do this over here. Alright. Troopers in Klawak, which is up north, up here. It's this town right there. So troopers from this town came to help. And they went there to assist today. The spokeswoman added that the boat had again caught fire today and had to be extinguished before investigators could board it. According to information from the State Fish and Game Department, a signer named the investor, maybe that's the name of a boat, like senior, named the investor had fished in Alaska this summer. The vessel is reportedly owned by Mark Colhurst, and it's registered in Seattle. So there you go. That's the just kind of a first article there. And we'll move on to the next day in the paper. Homicide and arson detectives are probing at least 4 deaths, 2 of them possibly children, aboard the Bellingham, Washington fishing boat destroyed by a mysterious fire off the southeast Alaska coast. The Alaska State Troopers said at least 4 people died Tuesday night when the flames swept through the 58-foot vessel as it lay at anchor near Craig, a small fishing community on Prince Wales Island some 60 miles west of Ketchikan. The owner of the boat said as many as 9 people, including 2 small children, may have been aboard. Hold on a second. All right. Man. Oh, that's amazing. Man. The owner of the boat said as many as 9 people, including 2 small children, may have been aboard. Troopers said 4 bodies burned beyond recognition were pulled from the wreckage when flames broke out again and delayed the search for more victims until Wednesday afternoon. I've got 5 people out there searching right now, said Sergeant John Glass, first sergeant of the Alaska State Troopers in Ketchikan. A trooper said arson and homicide investigators from Anchorage have been sent to Craig and the district attorney's office in Ketchikan and joined in the investigation. We're not really in any position to say at this stage whether foul play may have been involved, said Assistant District Attorney Luis Menendez. Glass said arson has not been ruled out, adding, whenever we have multiple deaths and a fire like this, there's a reason to suspect foul play. John Colhurst, Bellingham, the boat's owner, said the vessel, the investor, was a $750,000 to $800,000 boat, and it's designed not to burn. They are reasonably sure it's arson. The troopers said the 4 bodies recovered from the charred ruins were sent to Anchorage for forensic and dental examinations. Colhurst said the crew included his son Michael Colhurst of Blaine, Michael's wife Irene, and their 2 children, Kimberly 5 and John 4. He said others possibly aboard were Mark Stewart, Dan Moon, and Jerome Keown, and Chris and Don Heyman. Glass refused to confirm the identities, saying he did not want to do so pending completion of the investigation. There were no explosions, nor was the vessel skiff found abandoned nearby, as was reported earlier. Troopers said the crewmen aboard the fishing vessel Casino reported seeing the investor ablaze, so there's another ship called the Casino, and they saw it on fire, and they put an anchor next to it 1 mile northwest of Craig. Using the 2 Coast Guard bumps flown in from Ketchikan, crew and volunteers aboard the tugboat, Andy Heed managed to bring the flames under control Tuesday night, and a trooper aboard the tug removed 4 bodies from the investor before the fire broke out again. The vessel, which burned to the waterline, was beached near Craig while still on fire. So, like somebody, it's like it was brought to the beach and it was on fire at the time. Moving on to the next one. Detectives probe deaths, fire aboard fishing boat, homicide and arson detect. That looks just like the last one. I think it's like a duplicate of that. Let me go to the next one, the 10th. And now, 2 of 4 people found dead on a burning fishing vessel near Craig were murdered and may have been killed before the fire started. In a brief news release, the trooper said autopsies had been performed on 2 of the bodies and positive identification had been made. The victims were identified as Mark Colhurst, so the son of the owner, and his wife Irene of Bellingham, Washington. Yeah, let's just go through the story, Joe. Yeah, we just started here. Let's try to go through it and figure stuff out as we're going. Preliminary indications are that Mark and Irene Colhurst were victims of homicide and possibly may have died prior to the fire. He said the investigation also indicates possibly an act of arson caused the 58-foot investor to be engulfed in flames Tuesday night as it lay at anchor near the small fishing community on Prince Wales Island, some 60 miles west of Ketchikan in southeast Alaska. Troopers said earlier the bodies they recovered were burned beyond recognition. They were sent to Anchorage for autopsies and identification through dental records. Troopers said the others believed aboard, including the Colhurst children, John 4 and Kimberly 5, Michael Stewart 19 of Bellingham, Dean Moon and Jerome Keown, both 19 years old, from Blaine, Washington. Oh, that's interesting. No, it's Blaine, Idaho is that place. Okay, so it's Blaine, Idaho. I mean, I was just thinking, because it was like, it's weird how there's a Johnson, Idaho, Johnson, Washington, Blaine, Washington, Blaine, Idaho. All right, now it's like 11 days later. Hey Scott, what do rain gutters have to do with anything that we're talking about right here? I was just thought I'd turn my head and I need an estimate on rain gutters. Man, that's when you know you've lost an audience. I think that's like the quintessential term when you've lost an audience is when somebody says, "I need some rain gutters." Yeah. Let's see. Let me move on to the next one here. A drifting boat, abandoned mooring lines, and other mysterious events are keeping John and Sally Colhurst confused about the events that led to the deaths of 5 family members aboard a fishing vessel in southeast Alaska. But the Colhursts say that despite the uncertainty, they still believe an unidentified and unaccounted for crew member did not commit the mass killing and arson aboard the Purse Senior investor near Craig, Alaska. I mean, what's a senior? I'm going to look that up. One who fishes with a boat used for seining. Okay, so it says seining fishing boat. And so what is seining, I guess? Is that like the net or something? Or yeah, it looks like nets. So 2 poles, 1 pole on each side of the net. So it has like 2 big poles and it pulls along a big net behind it. No, good for you that you noticed it, Daisy. Wow. Wow, you're amazing. I'm actually reading the articles. All right, let's see. Mark and Irene Kohlhurst, both 28 of Blaine, were shot in the head. The condition of other remains prevented Alaska state troopers from learning whether others had been shot. But while the are confident about the crew, the Kohlhursts say they are in the dark about events preceding the boat burning. Kohlhursts do not know where their son last fished. However, he did sell what is thought to be a substantial catch on September 5th, so that was the day before. The investor tied up that day to the purse senior decade of a cold storage dock in Craig. Let me see if tied up to the purse senior at the cold storage dock in Craig. I wonder if that's still there. Okay. Well, there's like fisheries here, dockside cafe. I mean, I don't know what. I think it's right around in this area. Silver Bay Seafoods. Maybe that's it there. Yeah. Said it was a cove a mile north, and that's right where that is, right there. Yeah, I've learned by what you guys are saying that there was an ad that said that. Right? I got it. I get it. But yet again, it's still a quintessential comment. Like if you just totally lost the audience and you look around and somebody says, you're talking about something and you're going, oh yeah, look at this, and then a comment in the crowd says, I need an estimate on rain gutters. I think right at that point you would say to yourself, jeez. I see what you're saying, Joe. So you're saying because they said the ship was meant for not being burnt, that obviously there must be an accelerant on there. All right, let's see. Mark and where are we at? The Decade is owned by Clyde Curry of Petersburg, Alaska. So it's weird. The investor tied up that day. All right, so the day it sold a ton of fish, it was tied up to a ship called Decade. And it says the Decade is owned by Clyde Curry of Petersburg, Alaska, the brother of John Curry Jr. of Blaine. John Curry was one of Mark Kohlhurst's 3 partners in Angel Island Pacific Salmon, a cooperative venture set up to market their Puget Sound catches, said Karen Vitalchik-Evich, another partner. Later that Sunday, 2 unidentified crew members remained on board the investor while 2 other crewmen went into town, the elder Kohlhurst said. Separately, Mark Kohlhurst and his family went to the only restaurant in Craig celebrating Mark's 28th birthday. Is that, let's see if there's still only one restaurant in Craig. Ah, Jesus. Hold on. Craig, Alaska. Forgot to type that in, but it seems like you would have known, right? But this is 1983, so maybe there's more. Cat's Pizza. That's a bakery. That's another pizza. Hey, thanks, Zozo. The Craig Inn Bar. That's... wish they'd given a name or said where it was. The next day so they went out to eat. The Colehursts that died on the ship went out to eat in the only restaurant. The next we know of the investor is it was seen by the Decade drifting away at 6 a.m. So it was departing. Colehurst said it is highly unlikely that Mark or one of his crew would allow the investor to untie and drift. Oh, so it was just drifting without first having its main engine running. Colehurst said he's been told that an auxiliary engine on the investor was running at the time, so maybe the main engine was running. But the boat was not in a forward or reverse movement, he said. Maybe it was just idling, getting ready to go at that point. What do you think? Thanks, The Broken Scout and Mama 457 Rose. And Linda Howe. And Quietly Frozen. The coolest name in YouTube history. Colehurst said he's been told that an auxiliary engine on the investor was running at the time. Oh, so maybe the main engine was running, but the boat was not in forward or reverse. Yeah, that's what I was thinking, like idling. At least one person aboard the Decade saw an unidentified man in the investor's wheelhouse as it drifted away, and possibly another on the stern. What puzzles Colehurst most is that sometime after the investor drifted away, its tie-up lines were found aboard the Decade. Normally the lines are kept aboard for future tie-ups. That is kind of weird, right? So why would that be, though? Why would you do that? Like almost like you're expecting to come back and tie it up again on the same boat, knowing that they would be there. It's almost like somebody that doesn't know what they're doing, really. It makes you wonder if, like he killed somebody last and had them drive the boat back and then burnt everybody up. Because it's almost like this person didn't know what they were doing. Maybe didn't realize it. Like, oh, you just unhook it and get...
Chewbacca?
I'll be Chewbacca if you want me to.
Ocean wave, ocean wave, ocean wave.
A reward fund has grown to $15,000 for information leading to an arrest and conviction of the killer or killers of at least 6 people on board a Blaine, Washington-based fishing vessel. Donations of $1,800 were reported by Alaska fishermen only 1 week after the slayings aboard the investor near Craig, Alaska. The fund has grown to $15,000. All right, so an autopsy revealed that the owner of the fishing vessel, Mark and Irene Colehurst of Blaine, had been shot in the head before the boat fire. Investigators were able to recover only 4 other bodies, but they believe they may have been as many as 8 aboard at the time. So now there's 8, not 9. I mean, we're about 2 months later. Search continues for killer of 7 on boat. Now they've added another one. After nearly 3 months, the person who killed up to 7 people aboard the fishing boat investor is still at large. But officials say they haven't given up the search. Thanks, Whiskey Boots and Scott 88SH. Let's see. The investigation is out of the headline category, but we're working just as hard, said Alaska State Trooper Captain Mike Kolovsky. Troopers spent last week in Bellingham and Blaine talking to family members. A questionnaire and sketch of a possible suspect has been sent to all fishermen licensed in Alaska, and a reward fund in Blaine has grown to $15,000. On September 7th, the investor anchored in a cove near the southeast Alaska village of Craig, erupted in flames, and burned to the waterline. Witnesses reported seeing a slight man with a scarred face leaving the burning boat in a skiff. The man vanished after beaching the skiff in Craig. Troopers speculate he hitched a ride on a passing fishing vessel. I mean, this is something like right out of a movie here. I mean, this is crazy. Likely destined for Washington. Authorities recovered the bodies of Blaine resident Mark Colhurst, who owned the boat. Here, let's try it. Let's try to do something here. I just realized.
Hello, Gray and Freak's family.
Yeah, there's not even there's no street view out here. I'm just wondering if I go down here, can we sort of see where the yeah, I can't really, it's too, well, that's, looks pretty promising there, actually. Like if it was floating out in this part, I can't see because the boat's in the way there. I was just kind of looking there. All there is a hill in the background, but you know, none of the other parts look like that. So this is the only place that, I guess, maybe over here, let's see. Oh, that looks pretty good. I don't know, maybe right inside there? I don't know. It does kind of match that a little bit, but yeah, it's hard to say. Hard to say. Hey, thanks Whiskey Boots and Sandy Shirley. We're now looking at the possibility that one of the guys had alienated someone. Authorities have also been unable to identify remains of Jerome Keown and Dean Moon of Blaine or Chris Heyman of San Rafael, California. The other crew members, Alaska troopers say at least 7 people died aboard the Investor, leaving open the possibility one crew member was responsible for the killings. We're now looking at the possibility that one of the guys had alienated someone, causing the guy to go off the deep end, said Kolofsky, who suggested there may have been an accomplice. Maybe he didn't intend to kill everyone, but it blossomed into that. Maybe someone felt cheated out of their fair share. He said troopers were encouraged when they heard from the Bellingham Sheriff's Office recently that someone got drunk in a bar and started shooting his mouth off, but that provided little new information.
On zos, ocean wave, ocean wave.
Alright. So then there was an article that People published, but the date on it is published on September 12, 1983. I think People did have, I mean, they were a magazine back then, weren't they? I mean, that's kind of been around. Like a creature from some bloody B-movie, he was a menacing presence in the pre-dawn darkness of last year's Labor Day. Scores of fishing vessels were tied to the weather-beaten dock of the Little Alaskan Harbor. The hum and clank of their auxiliary engines created a blanket of sound to muffle his movements. The Indian village of Craig, Alaska, a rustic output in the wilderness of Prince of Wales Island, slumbered just beyond the din of the harbor, its bars and liquor stores shuttered, its muddy streets deserted, and its 600 residents unaware of the lone hunter stalking his prey. Thank you, Danny ICURN. Silently, the man crossed two boats and boarded the Investor, a 58-foot purse fishing, a net fishing boat that had docked in Craig only that afternoon. Armed with an automatic weapon, either a pistol or a small-bore rifle, and the element of cruel surprise, he killed all 8 people aboard within a matter of moments. His victims included the investor's owner, Mark Colhurst, his pregnant wife, their 4-year-old son and 5-year-old daughter, and 4 teenage deckhands.
Surfer,
they were
ocean wave, surfer, ocean wave.
Yep, surfer. Let's see. When 3 groggy, hungover fishermen noticed the Investor slipping out of the harbor at 6 a.m., they had no inkling of the gruesome cargo it carried. Oh, so that was the... I see. So it sold a lot of fish on the 5th, and then on the 6th is when it was burning. So that means when it was moored there was... I mean, that's crazy. So you sold stuff, and then how did they all end up back on the boat dead? So these 3 people who saw the boat didn't realize the gruesome cargo it carried, and no idea that the man in the wheelhouse was anyone other than Colhurst, the genial skipper from Blaine, Washington, whose 28th birthday had toasted the previous evening. It was the biggest mass murder in Alaska history, but it would not even be detected for another 2 days, and remains disquietingly unsolved 1 year later. The killer dropped anchor in a quiet cove little more than a mile from the docks. Alright, so let's see. The killer dropped anchor in a quiet cove little more than a mile from the dock, so out in the ocean, and returned to Craig in the Investor's skiff, like a little tiny boat that you bring along, sometime before 8 a.m. He maintained in the vicinity all that day and the following night. The next afternoon, with chilling boldness, he returned to the Investor in the skiff and set fire to her. Leaving the scene, he calmly assured 2 fishermen who had seen the fire that the people on board the Investor were not in any danger. Then he continued back to Craig. Putting it at the dock, he casually offered to lend the skiff to another who wanted to get a closer view of the blazing boat. As he walked quickly away, never to be seen again, bystanders assumed he was a crew member rushing to summon help. Isn't this crazy? The fire eventually burned for 42 hours, but he was interacting with people, but was briefly brought under control that evening, long enough for bullet wounds to be discovered in the first 4 charred bodies recovered from the boat's smoldering galley. We knew it was homicide right away, says Alaska State Trooper Bob Anderson. We sealed off the island and asked for assistance. But the troopers also made a serious error. Intent on keeping people away from the scene of the crime, they ignored the danger that the fire would rekindle. We told them that it had started again, but they told us to leave it alone, says Greg Johns, a skipper who had joined the effort to save the investor. What really gets me angry is that we could have put the fire out then. When the investor was rapidly becoming a crematorium, incinerating the 4 other victims and all physical clues, police and dozens of volunteers vainly searched for the man in the skiff. A white male stranger in his early 20s, about 5'10", medium build and straight brown hair and a shallow, pockmarked complexion. He had been wearing glasses with rectangular lenses. No one matching that description left by the seaplane to Ketchikan or the thrice weekly ferry to so investigators concluded he must have escaped on one of approximately 150 other fishing boats at the time of the killings. Or he just didn't wear his square glasses, With the investor now burning to the waterline, police grimly sifted 2 tons of soggy ashes through fine mesh screens to extract the human remains, a single tooth, and 10 pounds of bone fragments. Pathologists identified the first 4 bodies recovered as those of Colhurst, who had purchased the $850,000 fishing boat the previous winter. His wife Irene, 28, the daughter Kimberly, who was to have started kindergarten that week, and Colhurst's cousin Michael Stewart, 19, a sophomore at Washington State University, later identified were the remains of Jerome Keown, 19, a Seattle University honor student, also from Blaine, who had been recruited to the investor crew only the week before. The other victims, all burned beyond recognition, were presumed to be Dean Moon, 19, a former Blaine High School football star, Chris Heyman of San Rafael, California, who would have been 18 the day the investor burned, and Little John Colhurst. A task force of Alaska State Troopers led by veteran homicide detectives Sergeant Charles Miller descended on Craig and Blaine in hope of finding a motive for the crime. Drug trafficking was ruled out following interviews with the victims' colleagues and families. Robbery was discounted because the fishing boat carried little or no cash, and the killer's skill in handling the investor indicated he was familiar enough with the fishing business to know that. In Little Blaine, a population of 2,250 people on the Canadian border, police looked for an explanation in the victim's past. The killer may not be here, but the answer is, declared Miller, yet he found nothing that might have led to the slaughter of in Craig, 650 miles up the coast. There was never any indication that anybody on that boat made enemies, or that anybody was resentful, said Leroy Fleming, a 20-year-old Border Patrol veteran. Just want to see where we're at here. Could the killer somehow have struck the wrong target, meaning to kill the crew of some other boat? I always hate questions like that. You know what I mean? Those are just the ones, like what if you were to go with that? There's no direction or anything. So why entertain something so far-fetched? Like, could the killer somehow have struck the wrong target? Okay, yeah, let's go with that. What do we do next? Miller dismissed that possibility when he learned that the gleaming, all-fiberglass investor had stood out like a man in a white suit among the aging vessels around her. Police also discounted a suspicion in Blaine that the investor murders were meant to warn Washington fishermen away from Alaska waters. Realistically, there's always been some hard feelings among Alaskan fishermen towards out-of-state people, but this would have been pretty bloody extreme. I sincerely believe it was an isolated incident and won't happen again. Such assurances were little consolation to Blaine, a close-knit fishing community unaccustomed to the daily violence of American cities. The killer, wherever he is, remains a malignant presence in Blaine. There was apprehension last spring when the fishing fleet set out once more for Alaska, and relief when the boats began returning last month. Obviously, the town is still upset. Yeah, I mean, that's pretty, 8 people murdered, and the guy's like on a, he puts an anchor out that's like a mile from shore. So actually what I was looking at a minute ago could very well be exactly what we were looking at. Because now that we know that it was like, what is it, a mile? Let's just say that was, this is about a mile, like right here, So it could be right there, that spot. Yeah, actually really, because now that I look at it, I can see another mountain range back there. And it makes me wonder if that's it right here. If I just kind of go like this a little bit more. Yeah, that looks pretty good right there. See, there's you can see this mountain range back here. I'm just wondering if that's what this is. Like that little dip in there. I'm just going to put it right here. I don't know. Obviously, he took a skiff back into town and arrest made in Craig slangs. A Bellingham, Washington laborer early Monday was charged with first-degree murder in the 1982 slang of 8 people. This is 1984 here. Of 8 people aboard the fishing vessel Investor in southeast Alaska. John Kenneth Peel, 24, was arrested by Alaska State Troopers at about 7:15 a.m. on a Ketchikan warrant charging him with the 8 murders aboard the 58-foot vessel. Bail was set at $1 million. The arrest is a product of checking out all the possible investigative leads, everything we've had, said Paul Edscorn, a trooper spokesperson. Peel is charged with killing Mark Colthurst, owner of the skipper of the fishing vessel, his wife Irene, their children Kimberly 5, John 4, Michael Stewart 19 of Bellingham, Jerome Keown 19 and Dean Moon 19, both of Blaine, Washington, and Chris Heyman 18 of San Rafael, California. Investigators said the victims were slain while the Investor lay at anchor in Craig, a tiny fishing community of 900, some 60 miles northwest of Ketchikan. Edscorn said the boat was moved early September 6th. Okay, so it was on the 5th is when there was a sail made, and probably, people have their own rooms on the ship, so they went to sleep that night, and then overnight they were all killed on the boat. And then the next, okay, that's interesting. And an attempt was made to scuttle it, and then behind an island not far from Craig. An attempt was made to scuttle it, and then, I'm not sure what it's saying, and then behind an island not far from Craig, the investor and its grisly cargo was set afire. So what's the island? Did they say tiny island? No, I didn't say tiny. But there's islands here. And there's one, there's ones over here too. I wonder if it was like right here. Wouldn't that make sense? Right in that spot. And maybe there's some, just something over there blocking its view from Craig over here. And they did say northwest too, so I mean it could even be this huge island right here. And then that would put it back here a little bit more. Hey, thanks, Lillian. Well, thanks, Marine Co. and Lillian. The bodies were burned beyond recognition. In the blaze, investigators at the time could only be certain they had recovered the remains of 5 victims from the charred hole which burned to the waterline. However, in a presumptive death hearing last month, a Ketchikan coroner jury ruled all 8 aboard the fishing boat had been killed. At least 2, Colthurst and his wife, had been shot in the head. Peel, who had been a laborer for the past few years, was working on a fishing vessel in Craig when the murders occurred. He had served as a crew member for Colthurst in 1981, and he may have been in 1980. I don't know, he said. Edscorn offered no motive, but earlier investigators had ruled out drugs and robbery. They were persistent reports that a skiff with 1 person aboard was seen leaving the investor soon after the fire was started. The skiff was later found tied up in Craig. I was one of those who saw him, the guy in the skiff, when we were down at the dock watching the fire, said Lee Axemaker, mayor of Craig. He was a cool character. He came up, talked to a few people, made a telephone call, and left. Well, what would that telephone call have been? To let somebody know it's been taken care of, something like that. People here don't talk about it much on the street. They were a little nervous. They thought he was still hanging around here. Axemaker said that he did not think there was anything unusual about the man when he saw him, and he said he doubted he would be able to recognize him again. There were probably 500 guys in town at the time that looked just like him. Yeah, he sounds kind of generic. So now this is like 1990. And the thing is, he was tried twice, this guy, and he was found not guilty twice. I don't know what the other charges were, though. I mean, why you got tried twice. He's 29, going on 50, not weary exactly, but wound tight and very aware that life's short. Being tied twice and finally acquitted, tried twice and finally acquitted in okay, so he was tried twice. Maybe there was a hung jury the first time. Acquitted in 1988 of one of Alaska's most brutal mass murders, has left John Kenneth Peele experiencing freedom as if it were temporary, as if he says he were still just out on bail. Hey, thanks, Mama 457 Rose. When the jury was out, I feel like that took 20 years off my life, Peele said in a weekend interview from his home in Marysville, Washington, near Everett. I feel like mentally and physically I'm 50 years old, but I'm always going to think I have more energy, like life is so short and you never know what's going to happen. This is the guy that was tried twice. Peele says he became the suspect because he too had been in Craig that Labor Day weekend, fishing aboard another boat, the Libby number 8. And he had known Mark Colthurst, owner of the investor. Peele said he used to date Colthurst's sister. Sister. He said he was thinking about joining the Navy when Colthurst asked him to go fishing in Alaska. I figured the Navy could wait, Peele said. They fished 2 seasons together, 1980 and 81 in Alaska and in Puget Sound. Peele said it's untrue the men had run-ins. In fact, he said, the Colthurst had sent sterling silver hurricane lamps as a wedding gift to Peele and his bride Kathy. Colthurst's body, along with his wife Irene and their children John and Kimberly, were found among the charred remains floating aboard the Investor. Hey, thanks, the Broken Scout. 4 teenage crewmen, Christopher Heyman, Jerome Keown, Dean Moon, and Michael Stewart, also were shot and killed on board. It's weird, it's almost like he snuck around and just shot everybody. Tying Peele to a circumstantial case posed obstacles to logic. For instance, how could one man of Peele's average size and weight overpower 5 men, one of whom, but you also believe, what about the guy in the skiff? And this sounds like the same logic they use in the Idaho 4 case. You know, you just sneak in, you don't have to overpower anybody. How could one man of Peele's average size and weight overpower 5 men, one of whom was protecting his family because they were sleeping, and property? Why would he choose to commit mass murder aboard a boat where quick maneuvers in a small space would be hard? Why would he choose to do it at all? The Ketchikan jury was deadlocked. Jurors in Juneau, who spent more than 3 months listening to 51 prosecution witnesses and none from the defense, reduced Peele to tears when they acquitted him of 8 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of arson. That's pretty interesting. Thank you, Lisa Valenzuela. I can't really say which one was harder, Peele says. It's like when someone has cancer and has to go through 2 operations. Even when you basically know what to expect, you know your life is on the line. Peele, who's working as a millwright, now says he's making up for lost time for 8 months in jail and having to watch from behind a screen as his son Kenny took his first steps. Because Peele missed so much of the child's first year, he and his wife went ahead with plans to have a second child. This gave us much more reason to, Peele said. He says he wants to come back to visit Alaska, that he's not afraid of reprisals. He's learning to deal with the notoriety is really kind of blurry, of having been a suspected killer whose defense tapped his parents' retirement savings. He has explained the ordeal to his son, or at least told him as much as a 6-year-old can grasp. All my friends my age have their homes. They've got their kids in school. They're pretty well settled, Peel says. I'd like to have a house of our own, some rooms, I guess it says. Oh, it's hard to read that. Basically, I just feel we're playing catch-up. Yeah. So I didn't like go through the whole trial and stuff like that. Alright, now here's another from, this is 2017 here. Oh wow, that's actually video of the thing burning. That's crazy. Look at that. This is people. Can we see better now on this? See, I can see it like right in this picture. There's a huge mountain there, and then it comes down and it goes up like that. So let's see if we can just vaguely find that. See, I think that is right here or something. It just seems like it's like that's the big, I don't know, what do you like right over here? That's, let me go back. I keep coming back to that one spot. And then that's the island right there. So kind of feels like this might be exactly where I have it right here, doesn't it? I mean, if you just look at that, how this thing comes down and then up, and then you've got the trees right here on an island. I have a feeling like this is like really close to that spot. So it's like if you watch that part again, when it pans over. See, it's like there's that low area, then it goes back up again on IDTV or something. Alright. 35 years have passed since the massacre of 8 people on the fishing boat Investor first shocked the nation. For those whose lives were upended by the killings, the case remains a painful cloud that refuses to lift. For John Peel, the former deckhand who police and prosecutors suspected of committing the grisly slayings, the mystery is something else, a question mark that still hangs over his head. Peel was charged with the killings in 1984, but after 2 expensive, headline-grabbing trials, he was found not guilty. Decades later, the case is Alaska's most unsolved mass homicide. Somebody out there knows what happened, Peel tells People in this week's issue in an exclusive interview after years of silence. The case will also be featured on Monday night's People magazine Investigate on Investigative Discovery. Might have to check that out. Somebody was responsible for this, Peel says. Somebody out there knows what happened, but I'm not going to waste any more time of my life on it. That must be him right there. The details behind the deaths of skipper Mark Colthurst and his pregnant wife, Irene, both 28, along with their children, have become no less alarming with time. Police said Mark, who was based in Blaine, Washington, and his crew arrived in the rowdy town of Craig, Alaska on September 5th, 1982, shortly before the final day of the commercial fishing season. The ambitious, hard-working, and well-liked skipper had recently become the proud owner of one of the most expensive high-tech commercial fishing boats of its kind in the region. Every one of the crew wanted to be like Mark, recalls Keown's older brother Brian, who was one of the best skippers around. Hours before the family was killed, Mark and his wife and kids attended a birthday party thrown for him at a restaurant near the docks, returning around 9:30 p.m. Mark and his wife and kids attended a birthday party thrown for him. So he got back at about 9:30. The killer then crept onto the investor in the darkness, police said, and executed his victims. That's exactly what I said. So it doesn't mean you had to overpower anybody. Several of whom, and I think it was like late at night, when they were all asleep in bed, a little bit Koberger-y. He goes in there and he kills them. Probably put a pillow or something over the gun and made it quiet. Several of whom investigators believe were shot in their bunks, boom, say, in quick succession with either a .22 caliber pistol or rifle. Around 6 a.m. the following morning, the gunman moved the boat to nearby Fish Egg Island. There we go. Let's see how close this is. Come on, just be the right one. I mean, it might be this one right here too, but I mean that definitely could be, but that looks like a fish egg, doesn't it? Ah, jeez. Fish Egg Island, Craig. Let me see if I look it up online. Fish Egg Island, Craig, Alaska. Which one is it? Oh, it's that one. Let's see. Alright, that's this bigger one right next to it. So doesn't really look like a fish egg, but it's this is Fish Egg Island. So it's on the side of it. Let's see what it says in the At around 6 a.m. the following morning, the gunman moved the boat to nearby Fish Egg Island, a mile outside of Craig, with the intention of sinking it by allowing seawater to flood the engine cooling system. When it was still afloat the next day, the killer, who authorities said was observed by numerous witnesses motoring back and forth between the investor and the docks in a skiff, returned and set the boat ablaze, reducing the crime scene and most of the bodies to charred ash. It's kind of dumb. I mean, if he had sunk it, they would have been able to recover the bodies easily. 2 years passed before police arrested Peel, who once worked for Mark and who had been working on another fishing boat and claimed to be asleep at the time of the killings. Based on his similarity to sketches of the suspect, described by police as a white male in his early 20s with a pockmarked complexion, let's see, fishing boat and claimed to be asleep. So I guess that's why, he had the pock marks, etc. But wouldn't some of the witnesses go, yeah, that doesn't look like him? Peel's first trial in 1986 hinged on circumstantial evidence and lasted over 6 months. Prosecutors suggested that he committed the murders because of a falling out he had had with Mark. It ended in a hung jury. After being found not guilty in a retrial 2 years later, Peel filed a wrongful prosecution suit against the state to recoup his legal fees and was awarded a reported financial settlement of $900,000. Police are no longer looking for the killer. The case is closed, says Tim Despain, spokesman for the Alaska State Troopers. Wow, so they really believed it was him. They just couldn't get the conviction. I know, didn't anybody say, hey, you just came from that boat, it's on fire? But the investor slangs are hardly resolved. It was pretty damn good investigation, says former Bellingham, Washington police detective David McNeil, who helped Alaskan authorities investigate. They got the right guy, McNeil says, but just because someone is acquitted doesn't mean they're innocent. It just means there's not enough evidence to show guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. Coldhurst's younger sister, Lori Hart, isn't so sure about that now, although for decades she was convinced of Peel's guilt. But her opinion changed last year after Peel agreed to meet her and her sister Lisa at a local diner and answer their questions. So he actually met with, the victim's family members. I don't know if he's actually the one who pulled the trigger, Hart tells People. But I think he knows more than he's saying. Let's see. Well, that's because he wanted to. If he's innocent, he wouldn't care if he met with them, right? I just want to see if this is the same one. It looks a little different. Nah, it's almost the same. The unsolved massacre of 8 people on fishing boat in Alaska. This is from May 11, 2021. Let's see if there's anything different in this. On September 6, 1982, 8 people were killed on a fishing boat. The boat, the Investor, sailed from a small fishing village known as Craig in southeast Alaska. According to Johnny Dodd in People magazine, a man shot all 8 people with a .22 caliber pistol or rifle. After killing everyone, the killer allegedly steered the boat towards a bay outside of town. The killer was never caught. To this day, the Investor massacre remains a cold case. The man, who authorities said was a white man in his 20s with pockmarked face, returned to the boat after docking it and set the craft of the boat on fire. He then vanished. The victims on the boat included boat captain Mark Coldhurst, his pregnant wife Irene Coldhurst, their 2 children, and 4 deckhands who were 18 and 19. The case is Alaska's most vicious unsolved homicide even today. According to author Leland Hale, Craig was a small fishing town in Alaska with about 100 fishing boats at the time. The population was 600. Coldhurst, in particular, had a very nice boat in the Investor that was worth $1 million. And he was often recognized as someone who was very talented at fishing. And it makes you kind of wonder if it was just something about that this boat is taking, catching all our fish or whatever, you know what I mean? Like wherever they're going, and they're taking up a lot of they're so much more advanced that they're out competing us. So this person wanted to kill them. What I would wonder is if was there somebody that came in later, like that really became the new leader of the area, and then sort of try to tie back an association with that. I have a hard time believing this Peel guy did it, even though the cops do, just based on like why would he kill everybody, like the kids and things? I mean, if he had a fight with somebody, it just doesn't make any sense. Let's see. According to we already did that. This means that Coulthurst was not a regular in Craig. Let's see. Coulthurst wasn't actually from Craig. He was a 28-year-old man from Blaine, Washington. Right. So you got this guy who comes into Craig, Alaska, with this massive, top of the line boat that's gonna sort of take over, and you'd been there for a while, and you could see somebody who doesn't want him there. It'd be sort of like if you were into gold mining and you had your nice little claims and you were going to keep moving around, and all of a sudden some huge operation comes in there, like Parker Schnovel, and it starts tearing through everything and doesn't really leave anything for you. His arrogant disposition would lead him to frequently get into fights. Yeah. In 1 week, Coulthurst caught $105,000 worth of fish in 1979. He was celebrating his 28th birthday at a waterfront restaurant, one of the only restaurants in town. Witnesses said the family stayed at the restaurant until about 9:30 and returned to their ship just after paying their bill. The family would last be seen alive just before 10. So I think it was like 1, 2 in the morning, maybe even later, where the person went there. I think they waited for them to fall asleep, etc. Once bystanders saw the boat on fire, they put it out, but were not able to save anyone inside. Well, they didn't really put it out. It started up again. No one could have survived the fire anyways. Mara Bofson of the New York Daily News says the bystander took 4 hours to put out the fires. They found 4 bodies charred beyond recognition. Hale separates the scene into 2 crime scenes, one on the boat and one on the dock. Investigators also found Coulthurst and his wife had been shot several times. There were bullet holes in the bodies. The remains of the crew members were found, but only the teeth, bones, and torso of those crew members. Boson notes the authorities tried to identify the remains with dental records, but were only successful in identifying a few of the crew members. The remains of Coulthurst's 4-year-old son were never found. Ultimately, the fire eliminated much of the evidence needed to make a case. Investigators, I wonder, did any of well, I guess they didn't really look like that, but you kind of wonder. I remember at first there was 9 people on the boat, and then all of a sudden there's 8. A coroner said the Coulthurst died before the fire. There wasn't any carbon monoxide in their lungs. And the blood alcohol tests showed high levels for the adults. Investigators also said the fire was intentionally set. The primary suspect was a man named John Peel, who worked for the Coulthurst before he had a fallout with the family. Peel was a 24-year-old from Bellingham, Washington, who was charged nearly 2 years after the murders. He had been charged by authorities from Ketchikan, Alaska, for all 8 murders as the primary suspect. They hoped to transport Peel from Washington to Alaska because even though Peel lived in Washington, the crimes took place in Alaska. Peel was a man who worked for Hurst on The Investor in 1980 and 81, so a year before. However, Peel and Coldhurst had a fallout, and Peel found work for another boat. In 1982, Peel was working for another boat in Craig. While the murders happened, one witness saw Peel and Coldhurst interacting with each other at the restaurant before the whole crew was murdered. Well, that's interesting. Maybe the guy is the guy, and maybe the guy at the boat that he's working for was like, "What's going on with our? This guy's coming in and taking all our fish." But still killing all those people. However, another witness said he wasn't the man on the skiff of the boat. Yeah, there you go. Authorities charged him for the murders because they believe he had a strong personal animus against the Coldhurst family for firing him. However, the evidence was circumstantial at best. While some phoned an anonymous tip line to investigate Peel, the reason suspicion escalated for investigators was because Peel failed a polygraph test. But there was still no physical evidence. The grand jury would file a criminal indictment against Peel and charge him with all 8 murders and first-degree arson. Peel was facing life in prison for the 8 murders, as well as 20 in prison for the arson charge. Prosecutors obviously tried to argue Peel committed the crime. After all, he was in Craig, and he did speak with the Coldhurst right before they died. However, Peel seemed to be a very unusual suspect. He had no prior criminal record and was deemed by all accounts to have very good character. He just got married and had his first child a year before getting arrested. And even members of the Coldhurst family described him as a real pleasant guy. Yeah, I think that guy was about to get railroaded. I don't know, it's kind of strange, but I'm scared, man, I'm scared. I can't believe you all think I did that. Let's see. As the grand jury indictment police transcription of a Peel interview suggested, had confessed. The transcription stated that Peel said, "I'm scared, man. I'm scared. I can't believe the things I did in there." In reality, however, Peel's lawyer said his actual words were, "I'm scared, man. I'm scared. I can't believe you all think I did that." Pretty big difference. The mayor of Craig, Alaska also said there were probably 150 guys in town that had the physical description of the man on the skiff. One witness said Peel bought gasoline hours before the fire, while another witness said they saw Peel on the skiff. Due to the lack of evidence, however, Peel would later be exonerated. The jury deliberated for 6 days after 6 months of testimony, led to a hung jury and a mistrial. In January of 1988, Peel had a second trial, which was the state of Alaska's longest-running prosecution and its most expensive one. It spent $2 million on the initial investigation and then $700,000 on the retrial. Peel was acquitted again after 3 months of testimony and 4 days of deliberation. Peel filed a civil suit against the state of Alaska in 1990 for wrongful prosecution, eventually settled for $900,000. For people who love the victims as well as Peel himself, the massacre on the Investor is likely still a painful memory given there was no resolution. Yeah, we just said that, Tanya, like 5 times. All right, let's see. A small remote fishing village is still shaken today by, this is 2023, by the brutal murder of a young family and 4 others. Let's see if there's, and these are pictures. This is Irene and Mark Colthurst. Right there. These are their 2 children, John 4 and Kimberly 5. On board were owner Mark Colthurst and his wife Irene, both 28. Their 2 young children, Kimberly 5 and 4-year-old John, and 4 deckhands. But investigators quickly realized this was no accident. Daughter Kimberly had been beaten over the head with a blunt object, while John's remains were never identified. Huh, really? Let's see. Who's... Okay, so John, the young kid, was never... The fiberglass boat had burned so hot and so strongly that no sign of him was found. Author Leland Hale has studied the investor murders for decades and written several books on the case, the most of which being, probably most recent is what they meant to say, 2018, What Happened in Craig. Leland blog also documents the minutiae of a case that continues to fascinate and appall more than 4 decades on. Maybe I'll have to store this somewhere. That might be kind of interesting. I'll put that in the description really quick. Alright. Even by standards of U.S. most sparsely populated state, Craig, Alaska is remote. Early on, one name came up as a possible suspect, John Peel. Witnesses saw whoever it was coming back from the boat fire in a skiff, but they didn't get a close look at him. It's boat to boat. He's in a boat that's fairly low to the water. They're in a fishing vessel, so it's higher above the water. They bring the guy out, he says. Yes, my name is John Peel. Yes, I know the Colthurst. Yes, I used to fish with him. Despite these details seemingly making Peel worthy of at least speaking to, Leland explained that it took at least a year for him to even to be interviewed by police. Cops put together a list of factors that felt any suspect would have to share. The first factor was they had to have been in Craig on the day of the murder. Although having just over 1,000 residents, Craig's population swells several-fold during the fishing season. Mark himself was an out-of-towner, living with his family during the off-season. Let's see. Leland, they had to know something about fishing and fishing boats, because just taking the investor out from the dock to where it was found, you had to have some skill and knowledge about fishing boats. The third big factor was whether or not the suspect knew the Colthurst. At first, suspicion fell on someone who had been on the boat at the time, but many questions remained about the reason that everyone on board was murdered, including the children. As Leland said, why kill the kids? That seems kind of strange unless they could identify you. I just said that same thing a few minutes ago. Colter's family always pointed to Peel as a suspect. They always thought John Peel was a suspect because he had been fired. He had worked, I know, but he already had another job and another boat and a wife and a kid. He had worked for Mark Colthurst the year before on a different boat. And Peel was kind of a troublesome guy. Didn't work very hard. In 1986, Peel pled not guilty and agreed to a jury trial, which ended in a hung jury. At a retrial in 1988, he was found not guilty, and on all charges were withdrawn against him, leaving the case as Alaska's worst unsolved homicide. What leaves investigators such as Leland most puzzled is the lack of an obvious motive. There were rumors that the investor... Hey, thanks, Kami. There were rumors that the investor was being used to smuggle cocaine from Seattle and that the family had been murdered over a drug deal. But while there certainly were fishing vessels working secretly as drug boats, Leland believes that explanation is unlikely. First and foremost, this is down to the fact that Mark was by all accounts an intelligent businessman who was able to secure a large loan from a bank to buy the investor. He also wasn't in Craig often and had traveled all over Alaska during the summer season that year. Rumors abound in Craig even to this day that the investor was where one could get the best cocaine in town, but with little real evidence. Peel went on to sue Alaska for wrongful prosecution and won reportedly $900,000. Today he lives a quiet life, mostly shunning the limelight, but he did break his silence back in 2017 on the 35th anniversary. He told People magazine at the time, "Somebody was responsible for this. Somebody out there knows what happened, but I'm not going to waste any more of my life on it." Kind of makes sense. Cops have officially closed the case, but Leland says the record remains in the archives in Alaska to be studied again. There's John Peel right there. And there's the boat. And really, that's been right next to the shore in Shallow. And this one's the last one from... This is Front Page Detective from January 2nd of this year. It was a man who worked on a trawler named Casino who first noticed the fire. Thick black smoke was rising high against the misty skies of a crisp fall afternoon. A Casino crew member alerted authorities in nearby Craig, Alaska, then rowed their fishing boat less than a mile across the water to see if they could help. Their destination was Fish Egg Island, on the west side of Prince of Wales Island. Let's see, hold on. Their destination was Fish Egg Island on the west side of... What's this one look like? Oh, the big one. Let me go back. Oh, that's that huge island right there. Okay, so it's the west side of that island. Yeah. So somewhere over here. It's been over 40 years since the fire, the investigation, and the discovery of the largest mass murder in the history of the state of Alaska. The tragedy goes unsolved despite 2 trials. Residents of the fishing village of Craig have heard all the theories about who committed the horrible crimes that obliterated an entire family. The alleged killer was former crew member who knew the victims, or a stranger, or an acquaintance with a grudge. Theories never seemed to settle. The crime, which occurred in September 1982, was widely reported and stayed in the news. Let's see. The mystery deepened with each new clue, and coverage blew up again when an arrest was made 2 years later. After the casino pulled up to the burning remains of the investor, disabled by the killer to sink, they quickly located the bodies of 2 adults. But the fire flared again, and when rescuers finally put it out, the rest of the victims were nothing more than bone fragments. Oh man, that's brutal. It's the guys that got there first were looking at bodies that were, fresh bodies that weren't burned or anything. Who killed everyone aboard the fishing boat, and for what purpose? The investigators sifted through the rubble and the ashes, located witnesses all over town, tracked down likely suspects who'd gone back to the lower 48 at the end of the fishing season, and mounted an expensive, protracted trial. But for the families of the dead, justice never came. Prince of Wales Island is the 4th largest island in the U.S., located in the Alaska Panhandle, the southeast part of the state that includes the capital of Juneau. Craig is the only town of any size on Prince Wales with 600 residents in the 1980s. Most of the economy rested then, as it does now, on the commercial fishing industry. Craig is 220 miles south of Juneau and a world away. The city can only be reached by plane or boat. In 1982, the Colthurst family was making a profitable living as fishermen using nets, capturing salmon in large nets aboard their new vessel, the Investor. The boat was impressive, with enough room for a sizable crew. It was more ship than boat, a 58-foot long with estimated price tag of $850. So it sounds like they were just like scooping up all the salmon, probably not leaving much for everybody else. And then somebody got pissed off, and it doesn't sound like the kids were shot, but they were clubbed. I mean, that's just like psycho shit, man. The Investor was Captain Mark Coldhurst, or captained by Mark Coldhurst, 28, but he hadn't owned it long. He began his ascension as a commercial fisherman nearly a dozen years before. Mark was smart, hardworking, and invested in himself and his family. The ship's name reflected his lifestyle and ambitions. He told people he had a plan to retire at 50. Most believed him. The ship carried 5 other adults and 2 children. Mark's wife, Irene, 28, was pregnant, and their 2 children, 5-year-old Kimberly and 4-year-old John, were on the trip. It's pretty young to be really successful for a young age. He hired crew included Chris Heyman, Dean Moon, and Jerome Keown, 19, and Mark's cousin, Michael Stewart. The men were experienced, but weren't necessarily pursuing careers in fishing. Chris would be turning 18 soon. Dean was a high school football star who just graduated. Michael was a college student, and so was Jerome. Mark handpicked them because they all got along, although Jerome was a newcomer. The crew enjoyed a good haul during the prior week, loaded with 77,000 pounds of salmon, ready to be offloaded that afternoon. Mark sold the salmon, expecting payment of about $30,000 the next day. The business arrangement was slightly unusual, but only because the Game and Fish Department had temporarily halted the fishing season. As a result of the delay, the crew and family would be killing time in Craig for a day or two. Mark piloted the Investor into port, tying off next to the Defiant, and a second ship, the Decade. Spaces were few, as about 150 fishing boats were in town at the end of the season. The family and crew walked across the decks of the two boats to reach the dock. So that means they were kind of like side by side, like, I mean, if you were just looking at that, but like a boat and a boat and a boat. But they're ships, so they were probably, I don't know. It sounds like they were side by side by side, and they could just step from one boat to the next boat. They needed to make phone calls and wanted to share a drink or two. The movements of Mike and Chris that night are still unknown, although it's likely they too went into town for a drink or meal. The family had plans that night to celebrate Mark's 28th birthday at one of the few restaurants in town. Apparently it was the only one. Ruth Ann's. Is that what it's called? Is that still there? Usually little towns like that keep the name. Oh, there it is, right? Ruth Ann's Cocktail Bar. So there you go. I'm not sure where that was. The family had plans that night to celebrate. There you go. A crew member aboard the Decade where a loud party. Okay. The family and crew walked across the decks. Yeah. The movements of Mike and Chris that night are still unknown. The family had plans that night to celebrate Mark's 28th birthday at one of the new restaurants, Ruth Ann. By 10 p.m., the family of four was back on their ship, the Investor. A crew member aboard the Decade, where a loud party was in full swing, recalls young John sticking his head in to say goodnight. Around 6:30 a.m., one of Decade's crewmen observed the Investor drifting away. From inside his boat, he saw a man in the Investor's pilot house at the wheel, and he waved. The man waved back. The crewmen assumed that was Mark. See, that's interesting, right? Because they're all dead at that point. And that's the killer, like, letting it sort of drift away. Probably barely turned the engines on, so it was just kind of idling. And drifted away, so it didn't make a lot of noise. And then he then moved it somewhere else later, and then was trying to sink it. And then got in the skiff, drove back. Oh, that's crazy. The silent running early in the morning. Yeah, see, there you go. They would find tie-down lines from the Coldhurst vessel on the deck of the Decade. So that means it was like, that's the one they had to cross two ships, so they must have been right next to the Decade. Later, the Decade crewmen would remember other details. The Investor's motor was running. There you go, see? They would find tie-down lines from the Coldhurst vessel on the deck of the Decade. But who would leave perfectly good tie-down lines behind? Well, somebody who didn't want to take the time to untie it and put it back on the ship because they're not going anywhere. They're killing these people. So that makes total sense that, like, you're just unhooking your ship and going away because you're going to scuttle it, and you're not really worried about, like, oh, I need to keep these ropes on my boat. The silent running early in the morning led to speculation that whoever was piloting the Investor wanted to slip away quietly. God, that's just what I said a minute ago. Around 6:45 a.m., the captain of the Decade was standing on the deck when he noticed the receding ship then made out a man on its deck who he described as stocky with light brown hair wearing a red and black plaid jacket. At 7:30 a.m., another Decade crew member observed the investor, now in the distance, nearing Fish Egg Island. The investor's skiff, however, bobbed in the water near the dock. As fog drifted in, the last few days of the salmon fishing season pulled most of the boats in town out to sea. The next morning, September 7th, the fog began to lift. A mile from the dock, people on shore could see the investor anchored near Fish Egg Island. Now the ship's location began to look suspicious. There was still salmon in the cold waters, but the boat wasn't out fishing. It had been anchored there apparently all day and all night. Thanks, Alley Cat. As the crew of the casino raced towards the burning ship to see what they could do, a man in the investor's skiff passed them, going the opposite direction. He was young, slight, wearing a baseball cap, and later described as having a pockmarked face. He told the man he was heading to look for help and gave the same story when he reached the dock. The casino crew lacked firefighting equipment, and although they were soon joined by Alaska State Troopers and the local police, the fire continued nearly unabated until the evening. Now, let's see. Once the deck cooled and the intact bodies were examined, it became clear arson was involved. Mark and Irene were identified first. Both had been shot in the head multiple times. It was later learned that whoever set the fire had first attempted to scuttle the investor by opening all the sea cocks and waiting for the boat to fill with water. The anchor point off Sea Egg Island was surmised to have been chosen because it was deep enough to sink a large boat. The fire died out, but the ship was still floating. Tired workers sifted through the remains. The blackened ship yielded 4 sets of remains, all burned beyond recognition, and would eventually reveal remains of 3 others in the form of blackened bone shards. The next 2 bodies would prove to be Kimberly in a decomposed state and Mike Stewart, Mark's cousin. Unlike Mark and Irene, their bodies didn't show definite evidence of homicide prior to the fire. The lack of motive, a strange daylight fire, extreme lengths to cover the crime, all circumstances pointed to murder with a desperate desire to hide all evidence. Yet the forensics were limited and little help. A jawbone led to identify Jerome. Whether Chris and Dean died in the fire is still unknown. A 4-year-old John remains haven't been linked to any bone fragments. Investigators theorize everyone died late at night on September 6th or in the early morning hours of September 7th. Physical evidence showed no one died from smoke inhalation. Despite help from the FBI, there were far more questions than answers as to why the ship was targeted. Authorities collected physical evidence, but what the hell's going on? Jesus. I don't know. Authorities towed the crime scene away, and despite help from the FBI, we just went through that. Authorities towed the crime scene away, but the investor ultimately sank about 6 miles away from Craig. Their case now relied on eyewitness accounts, and circumstantial evidence. The only solid leads were reports from witnesses who saw a man leave the investor in the skiff. Townspeople also witnessed a man buying gasoline the morning of September 7th. A picture of the crime began to take shape, but finding the killer was a needle in a haystack proposition. Most people in Craig and in Alaska were young men on fishing vessels that time of year. The man in the skiff blended in perfectly. Within days, $15,000 reward was offered. Whoever committed the murder had to get off Prince of Wales Island somehow and only had two choices. It's theorized he likely left on September 7th or the next day on another fishing boat. Authorities turned their attention to narrowing down the suspect pool, looking in the place where most seasonal fishermen live. And then there's the whole John Peel thing. The trial dragged on for 6 months. After a full month of jury selection, the anniversary date of the crime was approaching by the time the jury reached a verdict. It had been the longest trial in Alaska history and the most expensive. The jury deliberated for 6 days, and according to the Bellingham Herald, were deadlocked at 7-5 split, favoring not guilty. Jeez. The state wasn't finished, however. In 1988, a second trial began. The state argued their case for 3 months, and their line of reasoning hadn't wavered. Witnesses saw Peel in the skiff and in Craig buying incriminating materials. Yeah, see, I mean, if he did it, you can have people that just don't think things that might actually be important are important. The second jury split, again, ultimately acquitting Peel. 2 years later, Peel sued the state and won $900,000. And let's see. The confession never came. Peel settled. 2 years later, Peel sued the state. They admitted the case against Peel was circumstantial and the crime could not be solved or successfully pursued without a confession. That never came, and he got $900,000 after seeking $177 million. No other suspects have been identified, and it's unlikely the crime will ever be prosecuted effectively, although Leland Hale, a journalist who covered the case from the beginning and penned a book about it, believes there are people who know who killed the Colthurst family: Michael Stewart, Dean Moon, Chris Heyman, and Jerome Keon. The state of Alaska has no leverage to bring charges given that the evidence is sunk deep below the icy waters off Prince of Wales Island. Well, anyways, there you go, you guys. There you have it. And thanks everybody who was helping support the channel tonight. Where do you guys think we are on the like, let's say I had the goal up on the screen. Where do you think we are? I was kind of conducting an experiment. I mean, where do you think? Right. Exactly. Right. Yes. Not one time did I say, "Hey, everybody," I didn't mention anything, and that's just the reality, So. So there it is, right there. Look at that. Isn't that amazing? Not even a third. Yeah, not even a third. And so people wonder, "Gosh, Gray, I mean, why do you always saying, hey, if you could help support the channel?" And that's the reason why is, now we're at 75, right? And let's just say, let me just throw this out there. If you did 75 for 30 days of a month, you'd bring in a total of $2,100 that YouTube takes 30% of, and then you'd end up with about $1,700. And so where would our donations that, the stuff that we do at the end of the month, where does that come from? It doesn't. Okay? It just won't happen. So, anyways. Do you guys want to try to do it? Maybe we could do for an hour do the newspapers.com thing. Maybe we can figure out a way to get something going. Any chance? Yeah, well, it's still got 200 viewers. And it's a cold case, and I'm reading articles, you know, and that's just kind of... so what do you guys want me to do right now? Yeah, never mind. Alright, so thank you to Dana 1972, The Broken Scout, Cheryl, Wise Child, Mom 457 Rose, Zozo, The Broken Scout, Mom 457 Rose, Linda Howell, Quietly Frozen, Scott 88SH, Whiskey Boots, Sandy Shirley, Danny ICURN, Mama 457 Rose, The Broken Scout, Lisa Valenzuela, K Me, and Alley Cat. Alright, everybody, thank you all for watching tonight. Hope you found this story interesting. And as I always say, until next time, be safe out there. Yeah, I've been doing this true crime thing for quite a while now. And during this whole time, I have not seen one person that is a crime dissector, thug rejector. I'm a certified human lie detector. Gonna get ya on a stretcher if you try and play me like an old projector.